To say that I'm excited for Spider-Man Brand New Day would be the understatement of the century. I am very happy with most of the things I've heard about the movie, and it's probably the most excited I've been for an MCU project since Avengers Endgame. Truthfully, I don't even care about the MCU much anymore, other than projects about certain characters. Well, honestly, just two characters, but that's a story for a different day. Despite all my excitement, I've been somewhat worried this movie is going to make some of the same mistakes as previous Spider-Man movies, specifically having too many important plot points and leaving most of them underdeveloped. But as I've thought more and more about this movie and the specifics of the plot details we've gotten from trailers, I think I've come up with an idea that would be pretty spectacular if done well. So here's how I think I solved Spider-Man Brand New Day. Okay, I'm going to start by talking about some things I'm excited about, and the stuff I doubt Marvel will screw up. First of all, I'm a big fan of the title. Spider-Man One More Day is infamous among Spider-Man fans for being probably the worst thing to ever happen to the character, but I have a weird connection to the comic that follows that arc, which is Brand New Day. I actually have The Amazing Spider-Man issue 546, and if my memory serves, I'm pretty sure it's the first comic I ever got. I can remember getting it as a little kid and finding it cool to read and finally consume a Spidey story through his original form of media. In hindsight, it's not that special, but it is a very typical and fun Spider-Man story, but maybe I'm just nostalgic about it. On top of that nostalgia, No Way Home ends with a weirdly great interpretation of One More Day, so I think the title just makes sense to use here. Next up, we have the suit. And what more is there to say than that it's awesome? I think anyone with a brain can see that, so I'll just try to talk about it briefly. I always thought that Tom Holland's Spider-Man suits had the potential of being the best, but there was always just something missing. Well, more like too much. But this is nearly perfect. The red and the blue coloring is spot on, I like the textures, the raised webbing is subtle and not overly done, and they kept the typical MCU Spidey lenses, which I think are the best live-action lenses we've seen. I've just always loved how they move. It's so cool. I'm glad that Insomniac took that when they were making their suit. It's probably one of the best things the MCU did for Spider-Man as a character, in my opinion. They just interpret the expressiveness of his eyes from the comics so well. It's just awesome. The symbols on the chest and the back are super nice, and it just looks like you took all of the Spider-Man suits from the past movies, mixed the best aspects of each, and formed this. I only have a few tiny criticisms about it, but they're basically nothing. Next, this movie looks good. Visually, it looks good, not just generally. It does look good generally, but you get my point. I think a lot of the Tom Holland movies did not look that good, except maybe the Mysterio scene from Far From Home, which is probably one of the best scenes in any Spider-Man movie. Most of the other Spider-Man movies, especially the animated ones, look awesome. Like the actual definition of awesome, they leave you in awe. Spider-Man is obviously a comic book character and was made for that medium, but I think he has been so successful in film and animation because the character just lends itself to that sort of cinematic flair that can only be satisfied by seeing him move. Just the idea of web swinging is insane. It's just so dynamic. It looks awesome in the movies. He fights in such a cool and frankly unique way when you compare him to other heroes. It's just cinematic. It is cinematic. Even though it was made for a comic, it feels like it was made to be seen in live action or in animation. He just looks good on film. All of that being said, I think Tom's movies kind of lacked that. It just feels like they weren't leaning into the uniqueness of the character in the earlier MCU movies. And when they did, they just didn't do it as well as some of the previous iterations of the character. He's just always CGI. Why is he always CGI? It takes me out of the movie every time I notice it, which is often. The previous Tom movies just didn't have the pizzazz some of the older movies had. This movie, however, has pizzazz. I like that word. I like the word pizzazz. It looks fantastic. We know from set photos they've been doing some practical stuff, which I think is always a good thing. This shot right here is framed really well, and it really makes you feel how fast he's going, whereas a lot of the previous MCU swinging kind of felt too floaty for my liking. The backgrounds and lighting, whether it's night, day, sunset, or sunrise, everything just pops. Overall, it just feels more like New York City than the previous Tom movies did, and I think that's really important. Both the Sam Raimi and Mark Webb movies had that. It really did feel like New York City. I don't know if the previous MCU movies had that as much. In a perfect world, the environment of New York City in these movies would feel as detailed as Gotham did in the Batman, but I doubt it'll ever be that good. But this still looks really promising. Despite what I said earlier in the video, another thing that makes me really excited is how clear it is that this movie is a part of the MCU's New York. I think a lot of the time, the older Tom Holland movies get a lot of hate for how connected they were to the MCU, specifically when it comes to the inclusion of Iron Man. And I do get that to a degree, but Spider-Man has always been a part of an interconnected web of heroes. I love his relationship with the Fantastic Four, Wolverine, and importantly for this movie, the Hulk. I think the problem with the Iron Man stuff is that he was kind of treated as being superior to Spider-Man, and I do not like that. Despite Peter being a kid in many of his early stories, Spider-Man should always feel like he can hold his own when compared to other heroes. And this movie seems to be doing that. The way that Spidey is talking to Punisher in the trailers is great. He's not bumbling around and waiting for Frank to tell him what to do. He's kicking his ass and telling him to go home. Like, that's what I'm talking about. That's the sort of relationship I want Spider-Man to have with other heroes in Marvel overall. He should have a chip on his shoulder or something to prove. Especially after the events of No Way Home here in the MCU, it seems very clear that he's not going to have an in with the Avengers anymore. I kind of hope he carries some sort of resentment with that. Speaking of Avengers, let's talk about Bruce Banner. Using him here makes perfect sense as kind of a hybrid between Dr. Connors and Reed Richards, since the plot of this movie kind of needs a scientist character and needs a character who can turn into a giant monster. I mean, Spider-Man having to cure a giant green raging monster is always fun, whether it's the Lizard or the Hulk, so I'm super excited to see that. And I am especially happy to see that Hulk is back to his usual self. I kind of hope we get to see Spider-Man and specifically the Hulk interact when he's not being mind controlled or whatever. The last thing I want to touch on here that I have total faith in, well, I guess not total faith, but at least from what I've seen, is that this movie, it seems to have a pretty clear vision. The way that Tom Holland and the director Destin Daniel Cretton and many others involved in the film are talking about this movie gives me the confidence that they know what they're doing. As I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of an MCU cynic, so I don't keep up with the movies that much, but I heard that Shang-Chi was good, and Destin directed that as well, so that was probably good. I don't know, I haven't seen it, but that's good to hear. Like I said, it seems that this movie has a very specific vision, and that's what I want out of these movies. I think most superhero movies, specifically ones in the MCU as of late, lack a unique style and vision. I want more superhero movies where you can tell who directed it just from watching. Some good examples of what I mean are the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, any superhero movie made by James Gunn, but specifically his Guardians trilogy, the Spider-Verse movies, my favorite movie, which is Matt Reeves' The Batman, love that movie, and of course, like the Dark Knight trilogy from Christopher Nolan. We need more superhero media that feels like it was crafted by solely creatives and not just suits and producers in a boardroom. Alright, so if there's so much to praise here, why do I still have some concerns? Everything I've talked about seems great, and that's because it probably is, but there's just a lot going on in this movie, and that gives me some worry. So first I want to talk about something that I think will most likely be a positive, but it could very quickly be a problem if it's done poorly. So Brand New Day features a whole lot of villains, and I love that, especially when you look at who the film will specifically be showcasing. Tarantula, Boomerang, Ramrod, Tombstone, Scorpion. I'm a big fan of a lot of these characters, especially some of the more obscure ones like the first three mentioned. I mean, all you need now is like Speed Demon, Screwball, and Big Wheel, and you'd have an obscure knockoff Sinister Six. As for Tombstone and Scorpion, I kinda hope they tie Tombstone's inclusion into the ending of Daredevil Born Again Season 2, and explain that now that Fisk is exiled, Tombstone is looking to take over the criminal underworld of NYC. And I don't want him to be an easy foe to face. I think it'd be really cool if maybe towards the beginning of the movie we see Pete battling with Tombstone and kind of his new up-and-coming criminal empire. And of course, Scorpion's exciting because obviously he's such a classic Spider-Man villain, but he also has been set up for many years now, specifically in this MCU timeline. So it'll be really cool to finally see him and Tom Holland's Spider-Man face off. And last but not least, we have the Hand. As I mentioned, I'm a big Daredevil fan, so that's pretty cool. I genuinely have no idea why they're in this movie. That's kind of one of the things I just could not wrap my head around while making this video, but they look sick, and yeah, that's awesome. So once again, you're probably thinking, what's the problem then? Why does this make you concerned? You seem super excited about this movie. And that's a great question. I'm glad you pointed that out, and I'd love to answer it, but you keep interrupting me. Is that funny? Having a ton of villains in other Spider-Man movies has not gone well. Specifically, I'm thinking of Spider-Man 3 and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Both movies have some great elements to them, but what really brings them down is that the overabundance of plot elements, specifically underdeveloped ones, made the movies feel messy and poorly thought out. I'm bringing up the villains of Brand New Day here because truthfully, I don't think they'll be a problem, but I thought I'd touch on it. It's very likely that most of these foes will be taken down in some sort of montage early in the film to show what Peter has been up to since we last saw him, which would be an awesome opening. But the reason I bring them up is because all these villains, on top of two very specific plot points that we've seen in the trailers, seems like a lot for this film to carry. The first of these two worrying plot points is the human spider stuff. On its face, this looks seriously interesting, and I really do think it could be done well, but I have a few reservations. I do not want them to go full force with the man-spider stuff. I do not want to see Peter with 6 arms. I think it would be cool to see this, but in some sort of nightmare or weird vision when his eyes go all black. Not him literally transforming and growing more arms. A storyline that I think they could adapt is the other Spider-Man story from the early 2000s. I think this, with some major changes, could actually work really well. In very, very simple terms, the story follows Spider-Man as he starts to lose control of his powers. He becomes seriously ill and is told that he is dying. As he searches for answers, he discovers his condition is not a normal disease, but actually a weird cosmic supernatural spider force that's causing these ailments because it's tied to his powers. Peter ends up dying while fighting the villain Morlun, who is insane. The lore with him is wild. I'm not even going to get into it. But Peter dies in this fight and then is reborn with new spider-like powers and uses them to beat Morlun. One of these powers is organic web shooters, which we see in a lot of the Brand New Day trailers. Okay, so when it comes to adapting this story, for the love of God, do not do the supernatural stuff, please. I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here. I have always hated the destiny crap they try to pull with Spider-Man. Peter Parker getting his powers should be a complete accident. Peter is not Spider-Man because a cosmic being chose him, or because his dad put his DNA in some mutated spiders. Peter Parker is not meant to be Spider-Man. He is a kid who got these powers, and through tragedy decided to use them for good. The moral of Spider-Man should not be about destiny, or stars aligning, or some mystic spider force that grants him powers. The lesson that Spider-Man stories should tell is that no matter who you are or where you're from, when given the opportunity to do good, it is your responsibility to do good. Peter Parker is not Spider-Man because of destiny. He is Spider-Man because he actively makes the choice every day to use his powers to help people. Being Spider-Man is a choice. I truly think the Spider-Force crap spits in the face of that. The movie's best bet is to adapt the good ideas from The Other and make it work for this narrative. Maybe since Peter fully committed himself to be Spider-Man, his powers are evolving because he's using them more than ever, like some kind of weird sped-up evolution. Maybe the weird magic involved in making people forget he was Spider-Man has awakened something in his DNA. Perhaps meeting the other two Spider-Man is causing some kind of weird reaction with his powers. Or maybe being snapped out of existence and back into existence has caused some kind of mutation. This will be very important later, by the way. Hell, I mean, it could be as simple as just over the years that he's been Spider-Man and had these powers, they're starting to change. Or they could just not explain it at all. I mean, half the explanations I just gave were awful. It really does not matter to me as long as the change is based in science and it's related to the story, which it already seems to be. I think the idea of having him gain new uncontrollable powers while he is ignoring the Peter side of his life is a great idea. It's as if his body is reacting to him flexing the Spider-Man muscle by evolving, but in the background, the Peter muscle or the Peter side of his life is just wilting away. So, like many of my worries, I think this aspect of the movie, as long as it stays away from the mystical elements and fits into the overall thesis of the plot, could be great, but it could also very easily be messed up and just bad. Alright, so next we have the elephant in the room, Sadie Sink. Who the hell is she playing? I mean, everyone says Jean Grey, and I think they're right. I mean, Marvel went directly to her and offered her this role. No one else was auditioned for it, and based on what I've read, I believe she signed on to multiple MCU movies. I'm not exactly sure on that. It really doesn't make sense for her to be anyone else. Why would Marvel go through this strange casting process for a random Spider-Man villain? She clearly is someone important to the future of the MCU. So for the rest of this video, I am going off the assumption that Sadie Sink is playing Jean Grey. If she's not, then this video will age like milk, but it was fun either way, so who cares? So initially, I really did not like this. As I mentioned before, this movie has a lot of moving parts, and now you're throwing in the first appearance of a new X-Men character? That seems wild to say the least. Plus, to my knowledge, Spidey has not had many direct connections with Jean. I mean, he interacts with the X-Men a lot, but I can't think of too many stories where Spider-Man and Jean Grey are the focus, specifically where it's in an antagonistic way. I was initially, and still to some degree, worried that having her feature so heavily in this movie would make it feel like another MCU cameo fest like Multiverse of Madness, which is awful, I hate that movie, Deadpool and Wolverine, which also is kind of meh, and even to some extent a movie I quite like, No Way Home. But then I started thinking about it more. So we can see in the trailers the Department of Damage Control is playing a big role in this movie, and from what it looks like in the trailers, Spidey will be working with them to some extent. Now, normally Damage Control is a company or government organization that cleans up after superhero battles, but this guy, Bill Metzger, he made everything click in my head. So I'm not going to be a poser and act like I know who this is. I'm not a giant fan of the X-Men. I grew up watching the movies and stuff, and I really like Wolverine, but as a group, I'm not the biggest fan. So I went ahead and looked him up after finding out that this guy is called Bill Metzger in the movie. That's who he's playing. And from what I can tell in the comics, William Metzger is a prominent anti-mutant activist and is just kind of your typical human X-Men antagonist who wants to annihilate and contain mutant kind. So in other words, he sucks. And I am telling you, once I thought about this movie with that knowledge in mind, everything clicked. I think I now have an idea or a theory of how to make all these elements, the ones I'm excited about, the ones I'm concerned about, everything, and make it work in a cohesive and cool story. Alright, so here it is. This is my theory on the plot of Brand New Day. I know there's a lot of different ideas out there. I've read a few. And, a lot of stuff sounds cool and interesting that I'm reading, but in my head, I cannot imagine this movie doing some of the things I see people talking about and having it work. So this is my idea of how to take all the things we know from the trailers and make it work in a cohesive story. I'm just going to preface here and say that I'm going to go in depth on some aspects I'm pretty confident about, and maybe gloss over some other parts that I'm not so sure on. But overall, I think this is a pretty good general outline of how all these plot points could work in a movie. So it has been 4 years since everyone forgot who Peter Parker is. Pete is kept to himself over this span of time, getting his GED and taking odd jobs here and there to maintain his apartment and to keep up on Spidey gadgets. He's kept up with Ned and MJ via social media, but only just that. To take up his free time, he is spending his days as the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man and fully committing his great power to this great responsibility. This is where we see a montage of Spider-Man beating villains like Tarantula, Boomerang, Ramrod, and Scorpion, all of which are being supervised by Tombstone, NYC's new resident mob boss since Fisk's impeachment in Daredevil Born Again Season 2. After this, we have a bit of a time skip, maybe just a few months. Here is when we see that APC battle in the streets of New York, where both Punisher and Spidey are in pursuit. By the end of this altercation is when the threat of a mind-controlling telepath is revealed, as we see an old woman was driving the armored behemoth all along. After this revelation, Spider-Man meets with the Department of Damage Control Director, Bill Metzger. Metzger informs him this is a mutant he has been tracking for a long time, and Spider-Man is the first person he's met who isn't affected by the mind control. This means Spider-Man and Damage Control will have to team up to stop this new unprecedented threat. Peter is now obviously concerned about this new foe, as it's like nothing he's ever faced. This constant stress of being Spider-Man and the challenges he's faced while being completely alone for the past 4 years are starting to build up. But before he can dwell on it any longer, his spider sense rings and zaps in his head like nothing he has ever felt before. His body instinctively moves to face the threat. We see it's Scorpion, who's back with a vengeance, taking Damage Control agents hostage to draw out his target, Spider-Man. Spidey isn't used to his body moving on autopilot like this, so he is actively fighting against it, causing him to fight with himself and slam and bounce into buildings as he reaches the battle scene. All of a sudden, while Scorpion attacks Spider-Man, still wanting revenge for what happened in Homecoming, we see Spidey's powers evolve for the first time. His eyes blacken, and almost instinctively, he takes Scorpion out like it's nothing. This makes Peter freak out, and he returns home where we see him get the organic webs. Maybe here we can see some crazy stuff happening to him from the mutation. And it would also be cool to see that nightmare sequence where Pete becomes Man-Spider, as a reference, obviously, but also showing Peter's fear of where these new changes could lead. Peter decides for the first time in 4 years that he needs to reach out to one of his old allies, Bruce Banner. He sneaks into an Empire State University classroom, where he pretends to be a student in one of Dr. Bruce Banner's classes, who is a visiting professor. Pete asks Dr. Banner about his work on mutating DNA, and as they discuss Peter's questions and problems while walking around campus, Banner quickly figures out who Peter really is. So the reason I say this is because 1, Bruce Banner is a genius, and 2, we see Pete getting tests done in the Spider-Man suit. Maybe make this decision to reach out to Bruce be really difficult for Peter, since he knows Bruce will likely figure out who he is first. Peter obviously is a genius too. Make Peter struggle with the idea of revealing who he is after so long, but Peter would rather someone know who he is again than continue to go down this mutation route. Or maybe they'll just pull the classic, oh no, I'm friends with Spider-Man, haha, yeah, no, I'm definitely not Spider-Man, even though it's so obvious I'm Spider-Man, haha. So the two reunited allies run some tests and figure out that Peter's DNA and genetic makeup is mutating, specifically the X gene. Okay, I know I might lose a lot of you here, but I'm gonna explain. Just give me a sec, okay? Pay attention. I have no idea if the MCU will do this, but I think this would be such a cool way to do not only Spider-Man's new powers, but mutants as a whole in the MCU. I think they're more likely to pull some bullshit where they just appear after the soft reboot that's bound to happen after Secret Wars, but I think this would be so much cooler. Okay, so in my ideal world, mutants have always been a thing in the MCU, but I'm talking like 0.0001% of the population. Like, so rare that they might as well not exist to the average person. After Thanos wipes out half the universe, and then 5 years later everyone comes back, weird things start happening to some of the people who came back. Maybe it's as soon as they return, maybe it's years later. But some people who were blipped and came back have had a weird mutation and now have an activated X gene. So pre-snap, the only mutants around were characters like Professor X, Magneto, or Wolverine, right? Older characters. But now, all sorts of mutants are appearing. For example, Jean Grey. Oh, and you know who else was also snapped and then came back? Spider-Man. That's right. I want these new powers he's getting to be kind of a form of an X-Men-like mutation. Now, he doesn't have to be considered a mutant. Maybe they go down the Ultimate Comics route where they refer to him as a mutate, like since he had powers before the X gene activated, that it's like he's not actually a mutant, but he has some more mutations on top of it, you know what I mean? Make it so that his reaction is so powerful because his already radioactive spider genes are mutating even more. I think this would be so sick if they introduced mutants this way, and if this is why Peter is gaining all these new powers. This would also explain why Spidey is immune to Jean Grey's telepathy, and even can sense it. From this point forward is where I'm not exactly sure on specifics. I think it's clear this pretend plot sets it up so that Jean may not be able to control Peter's mind, but can read it. This is how she knows about his powers evolving, how she knows that he loves MJ, and how she knows to target Banner since the two have been working together on Pete's mutation. As for some loose threads, I have no idea how the hand would fit in here. I'm excited to see them, and I hope their inclusion ties into Daredevil Born Again Season 3 in some way, but I cannot think of a way to fit them into this, so sorry about that. Another thing I haven't thought about too much is how MJ and Ned will kind of play into this. I think it's clear that they will get to know Spider-Man more, but the jury's still out on their relationship to Peter. The truth is, though, I really don't have too many concerns on the stuff they do with them because I think Tom Holland's Zendaya and Jacob Batalon, I think that's how you say his name, Batalon, I'm sorry, they've done a great job with these characters in the past, so I'm not really too concerned with what they do with them here. I have trust that it'll be great. All I really hope is that he reconnects with them in some way, and I'll kind of get more into why later. So yeah, like I said, I think it's clear the general route this movie would take. Peter continues to battle Jean throughout the movie, maybe a few more set pieces and battles, and is trying to stop her plan to take down Damage Control until he learns her true motivations. Show that Damage Control was keeping Jean in prison since her powers first emerged upon coming back from the blip. I'm talking they were holding her captive for years, and they've been doing this to other mutants as well. Obviously, once Peter learns this, he sides with Jean to take out Damage Control. With great power comes great responsibility. I don't want to overpredict too much, because that can be kind of boring when people just try to predict like every tiny facet and detail of a movie. I already have kind of been doing too much of that, so and the more I predict, the more likely I am to be completely wrong, and as I mentioned earlier, date this video horribly. So I'll end with this. At its core, I hope Spider-Man Brand New Day is about embracing who you are instead of hiding from change. Peter begins the film avoiding every part of his life except for being Spider-Man. After losing Aunt May and sacrificing his relationships with MJ and Ned, he's convinced himself that this lonely existence is safer than risking more change. He even tries to suppress his new mutation because it represents yet another upheaval he is not ready to face. He may have been miserable and lonely for the last 4 years, but he's been comfortable and he's used to it. Through his journey and specifically his interactions with Jean Grey, Peter learns that growth is not something to be afraid of. Instead of revisiting his evolving powers, he embraces them, realizing they make him even more capable of helping others. More importantly, he learns that being Spider-Man does not mean abandoning Peter Parker. I think for Jean Grey, she should also learn from Peter. She learns that her abilities are not just about taking revenge on the ones who wronged her, but are about helping people. She should learn the classic great power, great responsibility lesson that Peter obviously has learned. By the end of the movie, I want Peter to master both his new abilities and the balance between his two identities. I hope he takes the first steps towards reconnecting with MJ and Ned. Peter does not need to be dating MJ or best friends with Ned by the end, but just the small act of him reacquainting himself in any way beyond just creepily attending a party shows that he's willing to take that risk and evolve even further. The brand new day in question should not represent just new powers, but show that Peter is no longer afraid to be himself or let his life move forward. I hope you enjoyed my theory. I'd love to hear what you think about it. Let me know what you think. I know that X-gene kind of mutation aspect to it people might not like, but I think it's really cool. Let me know what you think about that and if that would actually work in the MCU as a whole. Also, I know there's some stuff I didn't touch on too much, like the hand. I don't know. I just could not figure that out. I could not make that fit in my story, but I'm sure there's a way it could fit, you know? There's some sort of way. Also, I know some people have talked about the symbiote being in this movie and like Miles Warren and all that sort of stuff. Like, I just don't know. Like I said, there's so much stuff going on in this movie. If you tried to add the symbiote and the jackal, like, come on, it's just too much. I don't know. Another thing I want to say, this is not me like trying to predict the movie as in like, oh, this is what the movie's going to be about, like confidently. I'm more so saying that this theory has made me more excited for the movie, just because I've been worried that there's too much going on here, and I was kind of debating in my head like, can this movie work with all this stuff in it? And I think that this theory kind of proves that absolutely, you know, people can make a lot of different aspects in a story work as long as it's well thought out and put together in a cohesive way. So, yeah, let me know what you guys think about everything I talked about. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.